You're listening to A Quality Podcast with your hosts, John Thacker Jr. and Jake Harrell.
When I was first doing safety at the first plant that I talked to you about, this is how crazy the rules get. But a forklift operator knocked over a bunch of skids onto another person, and that person got a compound fracture. And the company sent the person with the compound fracture to get a drug test and left the forklift operator alone.
Welcome everybody to A Quality Podcast. Your host here, John Thacker Jr. With me is co-host Jake Harrell, and our special guest today is Sean Fields. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you on, and today we're branching out a little bit in our pursuit of all things making businesses better. We're going to talk a little bit about safety. So, Sean, tell me about that.
Well, like in the past, I came on and I talked to you about like lean systems, about a year ago, maybe. Time flies. But what was funny is I was watching your episodes, and you and Jake were kind of back and forthing on a couple of different items and I really liked that. And I'd written y'all with a suggested experiment on a variation on that idea. And I didn't know if it would work or not. And the problem was, in my mind, that was for someone else to do, not for me. But then y'all kind of threw it back at me and y'all said, well, why don't you try it on our show? And so I kind of thought about it for a second, and then I went, okay, I'll accept the gauntlet, and I'll come back. But then I had to start thinking about what's the subject, because I thought y'all were going to come up with the subject. And so, but it kind of did come to me at a certain point, and I realized, we talked about all these different things, like y'all talked about LinkedIn nonsense and, talent acquisition, stuff like that. But one of the things that I see that is a really glaring issue that I see in industry is safety. Like, the thing that kind of gets me about it is that, like, 30 years ago when I was starting out, and I was kind of young like Jake, is like, I was one of these guys. I was working at a plant with 400 people. And I was kind of new out of school, and the subject of safety came up, and they kind of just thrust it upon me, because you kind of give it to your guy that doesn't know what he's doing, or you give it to a burnout, that kind to me, that, and especially at that time, I would say stuff like safety was what you gave to those kinds of people, kind of loser type people. And so, that's perfect for a new guy out of school. What does he know? And then, he just won't do anything, and that'll be okay. But what happened, and I was kind of thinking, well, I kind of didn't feel very flattered by that assignment. But what I kind of discovered was, I went, wow, actually, it started hitting me, because because I was an industrial engineer at this plant, and I still had to do industrial engineering duties, but I took care of safety on the side. And the thing I discovered is, it made me a much better industrial engineer. And the thing I realized is that if you actually think about the safety side and think about it a certain way, you can actually make the plant a lot better. You can make the work experience better, make things much more efficient, and get a lot of costs down, but without actually taking anything out of anybody's shorts. And so I really like that. Now, the thing that made it kind of more interesting is, I was at this mass production plant, and it was in the middle of the oil field. And so at that time, 30 years ago, I would say the oil field gave less than a care. I'm trying to keep my language nice. I know occasionally y'all let it fly, but my wife would just be disappointed in me if I let my language fly too much. So, but the thing, the oil field did not care about safety at all. And I was surrounded by that, because you just reach out to other people, you found out this and that. Now, later on, I kind of got away from that. I wasn't dealing with the oil field very much, but then I came back in like about in 2016, I'd say maybe 2014, but I came back at that time, and I was working with large companies like your Exxons, your Halliburtons, your Schlumbergers, and I was stunned. It was like, and I was like saying this to you earlier, it's like I was Rip Van Winkle. All of a sudden, the world changed. And if you go into any of these,
another analogy, I might know what it is.
Well, yeah, you know about Rip Van Winkle, right? Or no?
No.
Oh, it's a famous story about this guy in New York. It's like in New York you have these Dutch people, and Rip Van Winkle was this guy, and he went and he was he drank too much, and then he was in the mountains and he fell asleep, and he woke up about like 20 or 30 years later, and everything had changed on him. It was like, it's just one of these tales. So you can Google Rip Van Winkle and you'll see what I mean. So it was like I had just like gone into a complete time warp, and all these people were suddenly just saying safety, 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 and doing safety moments at meetings, and doing toolbox meetings for 30 minutes, and all kinds of paperwork you have to do. If you were walking on a shop floor, you had to fill out all this paperwork. And like if you're like a consultant going there, you have to like watch an orientation video, just on and on, just very, very bureaucratized is the way I'd put it. And so to me, the oil industry cared about the letter of the safety issue, like your OSHA regulations and so forth. But to me, the substance I thought was kind of ignored to a large degree. And to me, that's what I think of as a big opportunity is if like people in industry start thinking of safety as a way to make their operation better and make the work experience better, there's a lot of possibility there.
Well, I'll tell you, before I attack comments and we dive into it, I've spent 2 hours arguing with John in a text message about the merits of Tim Woods, and I'm heated. I'm ready to fight.
Well, that is stupid. It is beyond stupid. I totally agree with you.
Tim
and
Wood,
I would have been more.
No
I would have been more than happy to discuss Tim Wood with you. That's for sure. But that's from previous conversations, I completely ball that up in a wad of paper and just throw it in the waste, throw it in file 13 right away. Because to me, it's pointless, but that's
So a lot of good stuff. Safety is a really big topic, and it's important at some level to pretty much everybody that we work with, even if it's important because corporate says it's important, right?
Right.
One of the things that you touched on that I thought was really good is this idea that you were an industrial engineer who was in charge of safety, and that improved your abilities as an IE. And I think this ties into, some stuff that Jacob and I have been saying for a while, which is, when you add silos in, it doesn't change the company very easily or very quickly, as opposed to working with the people that are already part of the value creation process, right? So if you have a production environment, you have to have certain specialized engineering knowledge in order to execute. Well, if you throw a lean guy into the company, we now have a lean silo and you get this lean guy. Well, how's that going to affect anything? And if you have a safety guy, this is really common nowadays, right? We have a safety guy. Well, don't get me wrong. If the body of knowledge that person has significantly exceeds the body of knowledge everyone else has, then if they have the heart of a teacher, they can sort of start getting some change to happen in the company. The problem is sort of the social signaling that's sent out by having a safety silo, right? It's, first of all, it shouldn't be an area of expertise. Can you be an expert in regulations for your industry? Yeah, and you need people with that knowledge base, right? But what you don't want is a culture where, well, to know safety, I have to be a safety guy, right? Or worse, and this is kind of how it works out with both the lean thing and the safety thing, in my experience, is, well, it's not my responsibility. It's not my responsibility to improve the work every day. There's a guy for that. I mean, we literally pay someone to do that.
It's not the guy's responsibility either. And now it's functionally nobody.
And now it's functionally nobody's, right? And the same thing happens with safety, where it's like, well, I'm doing it the way that Bubba told me to do the work. So if it's not safe, fuck you, I mean, I'm doing it the way I was taught, and that's that guy's job. And meanwhile, the safety guy's like, well, I'm really just here to inform and educate, but it's up to you guys, and somewhere the ball gets lost and we're playing the wrong sport.
I couldn't agree more. And the other problem, to me, the problem I've always believed when you hire a safety, if you're hiring a safety guy, they need to be something else. And safety is a piece of what they do. And that's anytime I took care of safety anywhere, it was always a side thing. It wasn't a primary thing, which made a big difference because, like, to me, when you talked about a safety person having a heart for teaching, I would also add they need to have a heart for learning because you really need to understand the work because that's where the safety is made or broken. If you don't understand the work, then you're creating all these dumb checklists and toolbox meetings. I see Jake was talking to me about this earlier, and I totally agree. I think a toolbox meeting is an utter abject waste of time. I'd say
non-value add by definition because no production is taking place.
Yeah. But also it's kind of like I have no problem with somebody twisting off for 30 minutes. I'm fine with that, but I just send them to go watch TV and, have a soft drink, something like that, rather than waste their time on a toolbox meeting. But to me, if you're going to use them for something and required, then yeah, why not have them work like Jake says? But to me, the thing that people miss a lot of times is, like, I've always divided safety into three phases. It's like there's workers' comp, there's OSHA, and there's real safety. And to me, the two don't really intersect. The three don't intersect much. And so if your workers' comp is like a behavioral issue mostly, like this first plant that I was doing it, people were gone for, if there's a lost time, they were gone for a day or they were gone for a lifetime. And a lot of that just totally, there were conditions that created that. But to me, deeper, it was more the supervision and the management nature of that place, because people were kind of disgruntled or the insurance sucked and they needed a way to pay for their medical, and they could use workers' comp to pay for their medical, stuff like that. And so that was one thing. And if you manage it right, then because if you manage that right, that's one thing. Then there's OSHA. OSHA's about the 20-year accident that's really ugly, and so that's good. But if you could be perfectly OSHA compliant, you can have a very unsafe plant, because the real safety I get into, it's the day-to-day stuff where you understand the work and you make the work as good as possible. And really, in a way, it's like you slip in safety with a sleight of hand without safety even coming up. Because if you can redesign the work where it's better, it makes everything just go a lot more smoothly. And you get into all those. Well, and I'll bring something up because I think you may have heard of this book, you may have not, but it's called Safety Anarchist. Have you ever heard of that book? It's by a guy named John Decker, I think. But what's funny is that he kind of goes into all the cultural stuff. But I really, the title grabbed me because I liked it. He's talking. He really is kind of bristling against all that overhead and so forth. And so I really like that, but kind of like I had some other elements, because to me, I'm a big believer that technical can actually drive culture, because I actually don't like talking about culture, because to me, it's primarily about, how about I not be a stiff idiot? That's, if you can get in your mind, I'm not going to be a stiff idiot. To me, culture has a way of taking care of itself. I don't know, like what y'all's, like, I figure that's been y'all's experience. Just be,
it's an outcome of the environment in which you're a part of. So to talk about it is to avoid any actual root causes. Right.
Yeah. And what's funny is, the thing that I've always found it to be the universal solvent of culture is skill. If you actually know what the hell you're talking about and you're good at what you do, people respect it. And it's like, I don't care what culture, race, whatever you're from. If someone has skill, people are going to be okay with you. You know what I'm saying? And so to me, like, granted, not everybody can, you've got to work actively and apply yourself to become decent. But if you're actually going that way, I think people respect it, So,
well, it's one of the things that we don't talk about very often, probably because you can't make money off of talking about it. But, the biggest input to culture, when we talk about workplace culture, is the actual work itself. And that applies to safety as well.
Yeah.
Right. You want a safety culture. What you're really talking about is, how do I do the work? How, not what does the standards say, but what do I actually have to do every day to earn a living?
Yeah.
Right. What's really going on? And you can't, legislate safety.
Yeah.
Right. You can't say, well, this is the official way we're going to do it because it's safe. Well, I mean, come on, man. Like, how many times have you seen people cheat official systems. And there's all kinds of reasons for it. This idea that it's production pressure, that's largely false. It's very rare that you'll see somebody cheat a safety system because, well, I'm not going to hit my numbers. No, but what they might use that as an excuse, but why they're really circumventing is it sucks. It's poorly thought out. They don't think it necessarily keeps them safe, or it might keep them safe from like that, once in a century accident. But come on, man, how realistic is that, to happen?
I just want to dive in on your last 4 words that came out of your mouth, and that's that once in a century accident.
Yeah.
Like that has become what safety is. Like, don't stand your pallet vertically up on the wall in the warehouse, or else one time it might fall when it's perfectly aligned to your toes and get you. Something that's happened 3 times since the dawn of humanity.
Well, no, right. And here's the deal. I do like, cause me, like, let's say OSHA's lockout tagout standard. I agree with that 100%, but it really is about just once in a while type accidents, or the one that everybody loves is air can't be greater than 29 PSI, which if you go in shops, everybody, you've got those restrictors and everybody just cut them off, because they can't stand dealing. It's like a low flush toilet. Everybody's going this, this blows, so to speak, and I want air. But the thing, like when I tried to do safety, I tried to make it invisible, like that cliche about fish out of water. I mean, fish in water. They don't know they're in water. It's just happening, and you're not doing active thoughts. Because to me, if you want something, looking at the thing itself is the bad thing. You need to be looking at something else, and then it gets you where you want to go. It's got, like in dating, if you think I want to get married, or whatever, if you're thinking about that, you'll never get the right relationship. But if you're thinking about something else, then you can get the right relationship.
That's something else there, Sean. What is that?
What's
something
that?
else?
Well, actually, I don't mean to get, honestly, I just thought I'm going to try to be the best person I can be. That's the way I looked at it. Like, would I want to be a person that woman would want to hang around? That's the way I thought about it.
So,
it's too late for Jake now.
That's not what I was thinking at all.
Well, believe me, I was thinking about other things as well, but really I tried to keep my primary thought focused on trying to be just kind of, not be a stiff idiot. That was my main thing.
There you go. So, despite the fact that your last sentence opens the door for all kind of inappropriate jokes,
yes,
I'm
is
going
correct.
to restrain myself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We talk about, or we just talked about, workman's comp, which has, a certain dynamic and effect on our behaviors and choices. OSHA, same thing, and then real safety. And there's 2, I think, really big challenges that I'd like to dive into. The first is that your bureaucratic safety, that includes workman's comp, which is essentially about compliance to insurance regulations, and OSHA, are very binary. Like, you're either safe or not on the basis of this standard, right? You either meet the standard or not. Whereas real safety is not about safe or not. It's not on and off. It's not binary. There's always room to make something a little safer. Right. Yeah. And those 2 sort of are culturally at odds with each other. Right. So I've worked in high compliance industries, including oil and gas manufacture of the products they use, right? Pipeline castings, as well as tier 1 automotive, high compliance mindset. Right. That's the culture. Yeah. And it really does inhibit innovation, including innovation around safety.
I mean, my main thing, like when I talked about, especially when I was first doing safety, my main thing was, it's just, can we create a situation where you're not hurting at the end of the day? Because to me, you go into a lot of plants and a good number of people, really, they just take it as just normal everyday life. I hurt at the end of the day. And can we just take that away, or at least reduce it? Like you say, John, not binary, I don't hurt or I hurt, but at least let's try to reduce that. And ideally, I would my ideal world is you feel as good as you did if you'd sat in your recliner in the living room watching TV or something like that. I mean, granted, you may not catch that, but at least aim at it, that kind of, and I don't go for the zero accident stuff. It's just like, make it as safe as if you're in your living room. And obviously a car could come off the street and drive through your wall, and then you got a problem, but that's quite unlikely. And to me, I'm just going for something that's good and safe, and we'll see what we can get,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's part of the CI mindset, right? Like
Yeah.
we're going to get a little bit better today.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I think the second issue ties into this pretty well. The binary mindset and the bureaucracy and the risk,
Yeah.
right, around safety can create a cultural element that I've experienced quite a bit, which is like safety as a cudgel, right?
Yeah.
So you might have employees who will use safety as an excuse to not do something. Well, I can't do that. That's unsafe. Right? Because that's the trump card. That's like Hitler. You can't get worse than that. It's unsafe. And for management, you want your employees to work safely, but also you understand that there's a risk profile that your insurance and legal team has basically signed off on. And, all work has some risks. Just driving to work probably has more risks for most people than their actual workplace. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we do live in a world that has some risks in it. And so there has to be a balance, with management where we are promoting a culture of safety while at the same time, there's times when, you kind of have to tell people that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but putting metal into the scrap recycling machine is dangerous. Like there is a risk there. Now, what we're not going to do is jump in the hopper and pack the metal down. Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, right. But to me, it's I think Jake was talking about it, but you said, oh, I'm going to lean a skid against a wall. And, we can't do that because it might fall over, and it happens once in a lifetime. That kind of thing. But at least one thing I've seen is people get worked up about minor incidents. And I don't want minor incidents, but to me, major incidents get really overlooked. Like I'll bring up an oil field services company I worked with. It was very buttoned up, no doubt about that. But that same company had a fire break out on a rig, and people died inside what's called the doghouse or the control room, because there was no way for them to get out. And like in my mind, this wasn't a rig I worked with, but it was a rig somewhere else. And the thing that got me is that is something you can anticipate. And I think they were so hung up on minutia that there was an elephant there that they didn't do about. Because to me, a window that you can pop out from the inside if you need to, that, when you're designing that rig, or one of those hammers that'll break glass, so people can at least, like jump out, because like you can get pretty high up off the ground on a rig, but I would take my chances there and jump on the ground. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. But I think that could have been anticipated, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. I also think that, some of the trends that we see are actually unhealthy and probably not what we want. Right. And I'm going to go ahead and say this and be the bad guy to all of my safety professional friends out there. Behavior-based safety is one of them.
Yeah.
Right. Behavior-based safety is I'm going to watch employees' behaviors and correct them.
Yeah.
Right? And then we're going to be safe. Well, the major factors to safety are the kinds of things you just described. Right. They are the product of environment and systems interacting in a way that was unexpected.
Yeah.
Right. But that's hard to pay attention to because you can't blame somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, did you send the rig guy for a drug test afterwards?
Well, I'll give you a good story there. Like you talk about drug tests. When I was first doing safety at the first plant that I talked to you about, this is how crazy the rules get. But a forklift operator knocked over a bunch of skids onto another person, and that person got a compound fracture. And the company sent the person with the compound fracture to get a drug test and left the forklift operator alone.
I
kid you not. I kid you not.
I am absolutely amazed that you think that is out of the norm. Every warehouse I have ever worked for has had that as a requirement.
I'm not
ever worked for.
Yeah, well, and I shouldn't have said that to you, but to an audience, depending on their experience level, right. No, it's ridiculous. But I mean, like average people on the street will go, you got to be kidding me, right? So I mean, because to me, the person who got the compound fracture got tested, and the person in the forklift didn't. Is that kind of
on drugs? It was his fault for those landed on.
Well, right, yeah, to me, it really is about blame, and it's like when they do accident investigations, it's kind of like you have to get it. Now it's like, well, I'll contrast. Let me backtrack a little bit. When I first got into safety, it was like there was the mentality at the time was it's always somebody's fault. It's always somebody's fault. Now, the thing that's interesting now is, and it's an ironic thing, if you get into these large corporations, you have to come up with a safety answer that totally excuses any kind of operator error. But to me, what's funny is that Deming himself said a certain percent, it's a minor percent, but a certain percent of errors are human error. Like a big majority is system, part of it's human. So, I mean, to me, there are times it's just a person had a brain fart, and granted, and there are times you cannot design the system around it. I'm all for designing the system around it if you can, but there are times it can't be. And ironically, the same companies that insist it's always the system, they put all these rules and regulations on an individual to control their behavior. And to me, that's a little bit ironic, because if it really is systemic, then why are you regulating people's behaviors at all?
Well, you can't make it into management unless you have a lifetime of a perfect record without making a single human mistake ever once.
That's what it is. Right. You go into the panel interview and they're like, so tell me about a mistake you made. Are you fucking kidding me? Right.
Well, I made a mistake of working too hard. I was spending too many hours at the plant.
I was too good at my job, but other people got offended.
Well, one time when I was walking across water, I made the mistake, well, and you could even Google it, it's like how to interview it, when they ask you about, something that you're not good at, how you should respond is, well, one thing that I've been slaving away at 40 hours a week after work hours just to get better at is, fill in the blank. Like, no, it's bullshit. And I don't think that, emotionally mature, realistic grownups play that game or care. Right. I'm certainly not going to interview you or anybody else and assume that you're not perfectly human like the rest of us. I'm much more interested in like your style. How do you address things? And, are you going to work well with this team? Because one, that's what's best for this team. And two, it's what's best for you. Right. It's like the Bulls of the 90s back before Jake was born. Not everybody could come play with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and win a championship with them. There were people like, I don't know, maybe Hakeem Olajuwon. They're never going to get along. Right. The egos are too big. They won't fit in the same basketball court, something like that. But anyway, so that's all a sidebar. And maybe that belongs in our talent acquisition rant. But, bringing it back to safety. There's definitely a gap between sort of required safety just by the nature of regulation. And, safety can be used like a cudgel. Well, I can't do this. It's not safe. Well, hogwash. If you don't believe me, and don't get me wrong, I'm a huge advocate. I think that if companies have the ability to make the work safer, they also have an ethical responsibility. But then go to India and Indonesia and Pakistan and some of these other countries and watch them work. Their assessment of risk is different than ours. What they think of as safe is different than ours. And a lot of it is based on socioeconomic factors, right? I could make my glass factory perfectly safe, zero chance of you getting injured by glass, but I would go out of business. So we do the same thing. We just, don't kind of like to talk about the fact that it's actually a risk profile, and we are comfortable with a certain level of risk in performing the work. We have a responsibility to train and watch and educate, but it's much easier to just blame people when something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think that the biggest one, I recall the most recent OSHA reports, sprains and strains being the most common.
Yeah.
Like, well, are you straining a human at any one point in your entire job from end to end? Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Are you surprised?
Yeah. Well, so there's a story that Jake and I are familiar with, a company where an employee crashed a powered industrial truck into a support column, right?
Yeah.
And the employee was pretty shaken up and said, my brakes failed. I didn't know what to do. If I keep driving, I'm going to drive into the office. And he's not wrong, because he hit this pole, 40 feet from the office, and behind the office, of course, is the exterior wall, and so he kind of crashed into the pole on purpose, to stop the lift.
Yeah.
And so he followed all the procedure, stopped, got off the lift, came and got somebody, whatever. Maintenance guy gets on the list, and he says, I put the pedal through the floor. There's no brakes on this thing.
Yeah, right.
So he figured out like how to get the lift back to the maintenance service area and all of that. And so we're supposed to do like a safety investigation. And, where my mind is going is, maybe the PMs on these lifts are inadequate to keep up with the braking system. Maybe they're this, you measure for those that don't know that are listening on powered industrial trucks, you measure service hours. That's like the amount of time they're in operation. Yeah. Well, the PM might be scheduled once a month on the basis of 60 operating hours.
Yeah.
And if you're getting 90 operating hours on that equipment in a month, well, your PM schedule is inadequate, right? So my mind's kind of going down this path. And we got, or somebody, I should say, somebody got feedback, you need to fire this person. And this came from corporate.
Wow. Okay.
Right? And I don't know exactly like the motivation there, because I think I'm a reasonably decent person with two brain cells to rub together for friction. But, they were going down this path of, well, he was going too fast. Well, first of all, how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know? What do you mean going too fast? Well, you're not supposed to go faster than 8 miles an hour. Okay. Is there a governor on the truck?
Yeah.
Is there a speedometer on the truck? Third, how the hell do you know how fast he was going? You don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, based on the damage, we can. No, you can't. You're not a fucking physicist. And if you were, you would know there's no way you can calculate that.
Yeah, right.
You're not smart enough, right? Go ahead. Did you do the crumple zone of aluminum, against a reinforced concrete barrier? I mean, it's complete hogwash, right? You're just trying to justify a bad reactionary email that you sent out earlier, right? Yeah. So, but to me, it just that story just reveals a very rotten culture, right? Yeah. Where you could talk about safety all you want, but if the results of an incident like that, are to fire somebody, what effect does that have on the organization when it comes to safety? Jake, what would you do if you were a fork truck operator? And
first off, I would badmouth the entire community about what a shite organization that is.
Yeah.
But I've actually got a personal story that is very, very adjacent to that, where an employee new at the company, first day, is out getting his orientation out on a warehouse floor, doing his own whatever he'll do. An employee B, who had been there for years, mistakes new employee A for like the guy that's sleeping with his wife, right? Not the right guy, not somebody he actually knows, but I guess a glance or I guess a rough enough home life believes it. Tackles the guy, gives him a good couple of punches before we break him up and separate the two.
Yeah.
We bring him in to talk with safety and talk with what happened and what went wrong. And the safety guy whips out a book and says, "We're a no blame company. We're going to be letting both of you guys go."
Wow. Boy,
Can you imagine how these policies and procedures in the same vein, what that does for the culture and for the people. And
gets me about your story, Jake, is total downside. The guy gets tackled, gets fired, and he didn't even get to do the thing he was accused of. Right. Man, that's pretty bad. No, that's pretty bad.
Well, I mean, shit, if that's your policy, next time I'm just going to belt him back,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's
you actually inadvertently just created a policy where if you want to get somebody fired, just hit them, get it out of your system.
Yeah. I guess you get to go with them, but yeah, there you go. That's a,
well, those two stories, one, they're anecdotal but true, right? They happen in real life. And as shocking as they may be to listeners, this kind of thing happens all the time, right? And two, like they sort of complement each other in a Luciferian way, because in the first case, the corporate policies, et cetera, did not prohibit a C-suite member of the company from saying fire somebody because their fork truck failed, right? Completely reactionary, unfair, and also opening the company up to risk, frankly.
Well,
and on the other side, you have a company, putting somebody's livelihood at risk, taking away their livelihood because, well, we have a policy. It's right here in the book. Sorry, you're screwed. Don't blame me. I'm just the messenger.
My hands are tied.
My hands are tied.
My hands are tied really pisses me off because it's nonsense. People do what they want to do. Like, you can throw every rule in the book out, but if people want to do it, they'll do it,
Oh yeah, we're pretty creative. Like, as a species, we're good at figuring out.
They'll find a way to bend the rule beyond any human recognition to get what they want. So don't tell me your hands are tied. If you want it bad enough, you'll find a way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So just talking about safety in the workplace, maybe let's shift gears a little bit. As leaders in companies, right? We want our employees to be safe. That's the first thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, maybe I think, like, worst case scenario, you have leaders who aren't thinking about it, right? Mm-hmm. There's other stuff on their mind. They're thinking about, we're 2 days behind or what have you. And so they're not thinking actively about it. But when they do, we all agree, like, I want my guys to go home like the way they came in. Like, nobody wants my teammates to get hurt, right? So if we just take that as the ideal state, right? Like, that's what we all want, right? First, why is it so hard to get there? And two, what are some things that our listeners can do, right now to sort of move along that journey in a more productive way?
Well, what I would suggest, and I'm going to plug the book Quantum Lean here, but and this may sound ironic, but focus on the product, because if you use the product to guide you on what to do, you're going to make a better work situation. And to me, now, one thing I would add, if you are thinking about like operator comfort, personal comfort, and like not overdoing the body. And the thing I would suggest, and now Jake's too young to remember this, but I'll throw something at you. And I think John will remember this, but in the 90s, ergonomics became a craze. And I don't know, did you get to see any of that, Jake, or not really? I mean,
no, we actually cared about human lives by the time I was in the workforce.
Right. Well, what's funny is one thing I always kind of held in contempt about ergonomics is all they wanted to do was put a curved handle on stuff, and also create things where you just do all these awkward positions. Like, Jake, you're not going to remember this, but they had a keyboard in the 90s where your hands did this. I don't know if you remember that, John. And I mean, it just went over like a lead balloon. But the point I bring up is that, like, ergonomics, I think is a very beneficial thing if you're thinking about it right. Like they say, it's force, frequency, position, and there's one thing I add is time, because if you think about force and time, to me, those are the two biggies. I don't care. Well, frequency's there, but if you get the time and if you get the force down, that's the governing thing, because then the frequency doesn't matter that much. But if you can get the force and the time down, and what I mean by that, if you're having to hold a force for a long time at a time, that's what I've always found to be the damaging thing. And then then frequency, then awkwardness of position. Awkwardness of position, if you've got no force, no frequency, and no dwell time on it, then position just doesn't matter that much. So I'd say if you're thinking about those things and think about the product to tell you what to do, you can streamline things. And then to me, if you're thinking about that other thing about the ergonomic aspect, and just doing things that, like, to me, OSHA's not a terrible guide. There are things that they do that are overkill. But if you're thinking about what could go wrong, then I think that you can do a pretty safe workplace. And if you're a part of a large corporation, like, you're going to have to deal with the lawyers. And to me, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong, John, but I have a feeling that firing or penalizing that guy for driving too fast may have been a legally driven thing where they have to have a cause. And so they take an action to supposedly cover themselves. But like you say, the lawyer, I think, is being dumb because they are opening a can of worms. Oh, you didn't maintain your brakes? Because to me, like when I see somebody that didn't maintain their brakes, I mean, they really didn't maintain things because brakes have all kinds of redundancies to them. You know, I mean, you've got generally 2 circuits, you got an emergency brake on top of it. And when you've got complete failure, you had 3 things that had to go wrong simultaneously. That, you know, that's typical what I've seen. It's to me just bunk. And so the company opened themselves up. They neglected maintenance, no 2 ways about it, you know. And if you really want to start getting down to that, even though maintenance may not be keeping their records, they probably they could hang the person that rejected, you know, the design, you know, rejected the request to fix things. Because I have a feeling like that probably, well, no, it's that, I don't know if that's what happened, but I suspect it. So those would be things I suggest. But yeah, if in a perfect world, I'd say fire the lawyers and just take your chances in court, because you will do 10 times better, because everybody's going, oh, I'm going to get sued. I'm going to get sued. And to me, it doesn't happen that much. And the law actually favors employers to a level that's not to be believed. You know, like I don't have the heart to ask what it would take for someone to sue a company successfully. And to me, most of the time, that person has to be without merit of any kind. That's what I've seen. People that actually get shafted get nothing in court. The people that are actually losers and don't do anything worth a crap, they actually get the multi-million-dollar judgments. That's been my general observation. You know, reward the guilty and punish the innocent. You know,
John, I need you to get his positions and frequency conversation right in with his dating conversation.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
With the awkwardness of position.
There you go. Yeah, that's fair.
Well, so I'm going to kind of I'm going to lump everything into kind of 2 silos when we talk about this. So you're a business leader, and we're not saying you're a safety professional. You might just be an ops manager or something like that. But safety is a concern, right? You want your team to operate safely, and maybe more safely, right? It's important to you. Well, I kind of lump everything into 2 different buckets, right? And the first one is what I call compliance, right? And the compliance bucket is those things that they're non-negotiable. You have to do them because they're corporate policy, right? The problem that I've kind of run into is, for some corporations, there's so much in this compliance bucket, like they're trying to cover all their bases, right? We want to cover every possible instantiation. It creates a ton of work, and it creates so much work that nobody goes beyond it, right? And to me, that's the compliance culture.
Yeah, right? and the pencil whipping. I'll add pencil whipping.
Absolutely.
Like crazy.
Yeah. But then the other bucket, right? So the compliance, if you're listening to this, it's just something you have to do, and you may or may not have varying levels of success questioning it. My advice would be, don't question it, just do it. You know, that's that bucket. But then the second is the real safety, right? And there's some things that you can do there as a leader. You know, one of them is, if you make product, follow the product and just watch, right? Just watch what happens to turn your inputs into outputs. And you'll, get a pretty good feel for some of the risks involved, right? So typically the janitor is facing, less risk than the press brake operator, right? Fair. You can't cut your hands off with a broom yet, or it takes a lot more effort anyway. But you can also just talk to people and listen to them, right? Yeah. And this is where I think things get weird. And, for our listeners out there, you have to use a little wisdom here, have a little bit of shrewdness. But there's a lot of companies that will really frown on you as a leader if you're talking to your employees like, do you think this is safe? How could we make this more safe? Stuff like that. And some of that, I think, does come back to like the lawyers, like the legal team, and what are we supposed to be saying? What are we not supposed to be saying? Kind of thing. So use your brain, know your context and your culture, but just talk to people. Watch them, ask questions. I'm aware of a job in a factory, and that's as specific as I'll get, but that is very demanding, and people get injured in this job because it's physically demanding. Well, the culture of the people that are in this bargaining unit is basically like, we are the toughest dudes on the planet. If you can't make it, F you, you're not good enough. We're the Navy SEALs of the factory. All this unhealthy ego type of thing going on, right? Those are some barriers you might run into as a leader. Unhealthy ego, unhealthy corporate culture. So, use your brain, but yeah, just talk to people and find out what they're thinking and feeling. Another thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just so totally agree with that. That to me is utterly key. So I'm sorry about interrupting. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Yeah, like have actual conversations, talk to folks. Another thing is like you can review your OSHA 300 log, or whatever other records you might keep. I was reviewing an OSHA log some time ago, and 80% of the injuries, right, that are listed. So these are OSHA recordable injuries, right? 80% of them were essentially muscle strains, sprains, etc. Right? Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a pretty good indicator that your work is too physically demanding. That you need to do something about that. So some sources of information like that. I still think like for that, I kind of go back to Ono's, facts versus data thing. Like, don't jump to conclusions. Like, read your records, your safety records, but use that to point you where to go look at what's happening. Don't just assume on the basis of tabulated data, right? It's not really telling you facts on the ground. But you can go there. You can start there. Using tools like the Ono circle, and stuff like that, like just stand in one spot, watch this physical area of the building, right? So this is kind of the inverse of like follow the product. So like instead of follow the product, you're letting it flow past you, right? I use this typically like busy intersection type of stuff. If I'm worried about safety involving fork trucks, or also sometimes you'll have like where 3 or 4 conveyor lines come together, like in a big distribution environment. I'll just stand there and watch that, because that's where the stuff gets clogged. That's where people are like reaching in to poke it with a stick so it gets unstuck, things that can lead to unsafe behaviors, right? All of your like parking areas, for power equipment, that's a great place to just stand and watch. I know quite a few places that I've been, like that's the most dangerous part of the day. That's where your ankle gets crushed because somebody's trying to get in their lift and 2 people are trying to get out, and it's a kind of a traffic jam, stuff like that, right? What other tips and tricks have you got up your sleeve, Jake?
I've been trying to gussy up. Sean has been quite reserved with his language and tried not to make a comment about intersex, and then about also treating your business like a brothel. Hand out safety gear, have good ground rules, right? Participate where you can and watch where you can't.
Jake, treat your business like a brothel. Interesting.
Hand out safety gear, set some ground rules.
Yeah.
Right. Participate where you can.
Yeah.
And go and watch.
Well, I think Jake makes a great point, because John, you talked about degree of things. Nothing's black and white, and we're all prostitutes. It's just a question of degree. what kind of price right. We're requiring to prostitute ourselves. So I think it's
providing at what price.
Yeah. yeah, right. I think when I prostitute myself, the price needs to be ideally, I think, pretty high. So that's yeah.
No, it's actually a pretty good metaphor, partly because the industry that you're talking about has high risk, and what I've noticed is higher risk industries tend to have better developed programs, because otherwise they wouldn't be an industry anymore, right? It's not really an industry, but the branch of government that cares for our nuclear missiles. They have got a ton of processes and procedures to minimize the risk of everything, right? It's almost impossible for a nuke to go off accidentally, right? So that's not what the safety protocols are around, but they are around, theft and espionage, as well as accidental exposure to radiation. And believe it or not, like crush hazards and stuff like that. When you're doing transport, that's actually a significant issue. And when the payload is radioactive and highly sensitive and costs billions of dollars, like a rescue and recovery operation has to be specialized as well. So we'd rather just not get into that at all, right? Someday, after we've had a few drinks, I'll tell you a story that a friend of mine told me, who was an Army Ranger in charge of escorting nuclear warheads across Germany during the Cold War, in the back of a wagon behind a Jeep, and they broke down in a blizzard in Germany. Like, this is how close we were to total nuclear annihilation back in the Cold War. But anyway, so they have these procedures, and my takeaway from that is they don't rely on, hey, works more safely, stupid, nor do they rely on, okay, here's behavior-based safety. We're going to have all of these programs, toolbox talks and all of this. Instead, it's here's how you're going to do the work. Follow these steps in this order the same way every time, right? And that gets back to the process element, that we were talking about. And yeah, there's a compliance thing there. Like, if you're a leader and you have processes and procedures in place, people have to follow them, right? Otherwise, what's the point? And some of those steps, right, are there for safety purposes. So one thing that I do on the standard work instructions, like when I'm helping companies write these, steps in the process that are critical to safety have like a little safety symbol next to them, right? And I do the same thing with quality as well. But I do this on purpose because it is human nature to, one, question the steps. Hey, can I get away with not doing this? How can I make it easier on myself? And so I want them to know the reason that we do it this way in this step is so you don't hurt yourself, right? So some kinds of communication like that can help as well if you're a leader, trying to improve safety in your operation.
All right. I've not done that, but it's a good idea. I like that very much. So.
We sell that online if somebody's interested.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but shameless plug. By the way, for those of you that are listening, we might possibly take on another client or two if you need help in growing your business by leaps and bounds. But we're in high demand and we're really expensive because we're awesome. So get in line and we'll see what we can do. Speaking of which, Sean, Quantum Lean, what are you up to these days?
Well, I'm working in Oklahoma right now. I'm working with businesses, manufacturing businesses there. And right now I'm working through the Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance, but I'm still affiliated with Beehive Fund. And Michael Sanders and I, stay in touch, and like Beehive Fund's doing a lot of good in Texas right now. And so to me, if somebody did want to work on safety programs, lean systems, that kind of thing, I would definitely suggest getting in touch with me or Michael Sanders. And an easy way to do that, just a central place, is if you went to Beehive Fund, one word, .org, you could find either one of us, and then we could get into specifics at that point, So
yeah, awesome. Yeah, we talked about Beehive Fund a little bit the last time you were on the show. Glad that's still going strong.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a wrap up for all of our listeners out there in YouTube land. Thank you for joining us, but we just wanted to bring Sean on today and talk about safety a little bit, because there's a lot of hogwash around it in all kinds of industries, whether that's relegating safety to like an individual or a silo or a program, to ineffective execution of tools like behavior-based safety, using safety as a cudgel, bureaucratic safety versus iterative. So thanks for discussing some of these things with us, Sean, as well as some things we can do as professionals, things we can look out for to improve safety in our environments.
No, I appreciate it. I think your program's great. I think you know a lot of podcasters do a good job, but I think y'all's is a little bit different, and I think it's got a space that's really called for. So yeah, I'd love to be on this show. So I appreciate y'all having me. So
I do love we got to blame sucks, no blame sucks, behavior based sucks. You want it to not suck? Actually, change the way you do work. How about that?
yeah. I mean, and
which we
it
can
all
help
goes.
You with.
Yeah, but it really does go to the work, and you got to work with the people that do the work. And to me, I think a lot of the safety stuff is imagined by people who have never come within 100 miles of the work. And then, you get all those problems that kind of flow from that,
Yeah. So our encouragement is use the same approach to improving safety as you do to improving the rest of your business, which is actually engage in the process. Listen to your teammate and make iterative change. And sometimes that's really hard because, we're going to be honest about some corporate cultures and that sort of thing. So use your brain. Don't put a target on your back. But this is something that you can improve, and we encourage you to do so. Sean, do you have any words of wisdom or last ideas to leave the audience with?
Well, like I say, I gave contact information for me and Michael Sanders, and also I'll do the shameless plug one more time. If you're interested in some of the ideas that we talked about here, you're going to get a lot of that in the book Quantum Lean. And so just go to Amazon and you can or go to Barnes and Noble, wherever, but just type Quantum Lean into the search and you'll find the book. And I think you'll be glad you got it. So anyway, so I'll do that plug. As far as words of wisdom from there, I think you said it quite well. Work with the people, work with the process, work with the product. And I think that you can make really good changes in safety and get rid of thinking of it as a set of legal hurdles. Think of it as an operational thing that can actually make the whole operation better. And that's when I was, I think, pretty successful with safety. And is when I took an operational angle that I think that it worked really well.
Yeah, well, Sean, your name below. We'll reach out to you to communicate via the ORG. And we'll up our frequency and change our positions periodically.
All right. Sounds great.
All right. Sean, thank you as always for coming on a quality podcast. To our friends and listeners out there in YouTube land, goodbye.
Bye.